A warm welcome to all our amazing viewers at Midnight Affairs Tales. We're truly glad you're here. Your presence is what makes these stories worth telling. We'd love to know where in the world you're watching from. Drop it in the comments. Now sit back, relax, and get ready. Let's begin today's journey. Chapter 1. The rain fell in slow, cold sheets that night. It pattered against the windows of the modest Virginia farmhouse like a ticking clock, counting down to something unspeakable. The kind of house built for peace. And yet that night, the air inside crackled with something unnatural. Not fear exactly. Something deeper. Something darker. Outside, the gravel driveway glistened under the floodlights, empty except for a black pickup truck, matte finish, military-grade tires, the kind a man brings back when he's been overseas too long. Inside, in the dim living room, lit only by the flickering TV, Jack Carter sat silent in his recliner, unmoving, breathing steady but shallow. His broad shoulders were hunched forward, elbows on his knees, as if the weight of the entire world had finally come to rest squarely on his back. He had served 4 tours as a Marine recon sniper: Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria. Places he never talked about, places he left pieces of himself. But tonight, what haunted him wasn't something from war. It was something that happened in his own home. Upstairs, the wooden floorboards creaked. His daughter Lily, barely 17, had been quiet for days, withdrawn, pale, eyes blank like glass marbles, staring but seeing nothing. She hadn't eaten, she hadn't smiled, and she hadn't spoken a full sentence since last Thursday night. Not until an hour ago. When she came down the stairs, barefoot in an oversized sweatshirt, her hands trembled like wind-blown leaves. She walked straight to Jack, knees brushing his as she knelt before him. No tears, just one broken whisper, barely a breath, as her gaze bore into his. "He hurt me, Papa." That was all. But it was everything. Jack didn't ask who. He didn't have to. A father knows. The look in her eyes said more than any name could. The pain, the shame, the fracture, all wrapped in that one fragile sentence. And for Jack Carter, something snapped. Not in anger, not in rage, but in cold, clinical calculation. The kind only men like him truly understand. The kind of snapping that precedes something surgical, irreversible. In less than 2 minutes, he was in the garage. In 5, he had pulled out a locked case from behind old paint cans, dusted it off, and opened it like a surgeon, revealing old tools. Inside lay a suppressed Sig Sauer P226, a pair of gloves, and a burner phone still in its plastic wrapping. He hadn't touched this box in years, not since the last time he told himself he was done being that man, but that man had just come back.
Across town, nestled in a suburban cul-de-sac lined with Halloween decorations and glowing porch lights, sat the house of Brandon Hale, Lily's now ex-boyfriend. Tall, star athlete, charming smile. The kind of boy mothers adore and fathers instinctively distrust. Jack had never liked him, not even when Brandon came to dinner with that sheepish grin and faux politeness. Something in his eyes, too confident, too smooth. But now there was no more doubt. Jack stared at Brandon's Instagram page, the last photo uploaded, him shirtless in his college dorm, flexing and grinning under the caption, "Miss me yet?" Jack's hands clenched, not in fury, in focus. He didn't see a boy, he saw a target. The coordinates had locked, the wind had settled, the trigger was prepped. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about restoration, about reclaiming something taken. Not just Lily's innocence, but Jack's own belief that he could ever leave war behind. It was about control, closure, justice where the system might fail. He pulled open the drawer beneath the gun case. Inside was a notebook, thick, black, and water-warped. Its pages were filled with names long crossed out, intel sketches, and silent kills never spoken of. But now a new page was torn from the back. Brandon Hale, age 19, college freshman, studying pre-law, living off campus, weekends at home, parents gone till Monday. Perfect. Jack's hand was steady as he closed the drawer, zipped up his duffel, and stood. His body moved like a machine reawakened. Muscles remembered what morality had tried to erase. Upstairs, Lily lay curled on her bed, facing the wall. Her breathing had calmed, as if releasing that one line had begun to cleanse her. But healing doesn't come without cost. Jack paused at her door, watching her silhouette beneath the soft glow of the nightlight. For a moment, his heart stuttered, but then she whispered again, softer this time, unaware he was even there. Don't let him hurt anyone else. She never saw her father leave the house, never heard the truck roll into the fog, but she would remember the silence, heavy, hollow, final. And by the time the sun rose, silence would be all Brandon had left. The fog clung low to the asphalt like a second skin, the kind of dense, wet mist that distorted sound, swallowed light, and blurred the world into a ghostly dream. Jack Carter's truck glided through it without headlights, engine humming at idle speed, tires whispering over the dark rural roads of Fairfax County. He knew this route better than he knew his own reflection. But tonight, every turn had weight. Every corner felt biblical. He wasn't just driving toward a house. He was driving into an old version of himself, the version he buried with medals and nightmares and promises to Lily's mother before she passed away. No more violence, Jack. No more war at home. But some wars come for you. Some devils don't wear uniforms. They wear varsity jackets. At a half-mile from Brandon's neighborhood, Jack killed the engine and coasted into a wooded turnout. The world was silent except for the occasional rustle of branches above. He slipped out of the truck with calculated precision, each movement practiced, patient, perfected through years of black ops deployment. He wore dark cargo pants, a fitted thermal shirt, and light tactical gloves. On his back was the same gear bag he once used to crawl behind enemy lines. Tonight, it carried truth. He walked the final stretch on foot, a silent shadow among trees and fences. Every step placed with purpose, every breath rationed. By the time he reached the edge of Brandon Hale's backyard, Jack had already mapped every exit. 2 ground-level windows, 1 patio door, 1 narrow side gate. Cameras? None visible. Most rich kids' parents thought the neighborhood was security enough. That was their first mistake. Through a slit between curtains, Jack saw movement, soft blue light flickering inside the den. Brandon was home, alone. Slouched on the couch in basketball shorts and headphones, controller in hand, absorbed in the glowing screen. Completely unaware that something far more dangerous than a Call of Duty enemy had him in the crosshairs. Jack's breath fogged faintly in the cold as he crouched beneath the deck and opened his bag. He pulled out a suppressed drone, a small, quiet quadcopter barely louder than a moth. He sent it up, guiding it with a wrist-mounted control screen. Through its camera, he watched the second floor, scanning windows. Clear, unoccupied. Then down again, toward the sliding patio door. Unlocked. Click. He approached low, slow, and with the patience of a hunter who doesn't miss. With one gloved hand, he slid the glass door open just enough to slip inside. Brandon's headphones were blasting some EDM. Beat, repetitive, pulsating, oblivious. Jack stood behind him for 3 full seconds before he reached forward and pulled the plug on the power strip. The room went black. Brandon cursed, yanked off his headset, and turned. What he saw was not a man. It was something colder, a storm made flesh, standing 6 feet of muscle and shadow with a black pistol leveled at his chest. He didn't scream. He couldn't, because Jack didn't give him time. With military precision, he advanced, grabbed the boy by the collar, and shoved him back into the couch. The weapon pressed against Brandon's sternum, not hard enough to bruise, just hard enough to promise finality. Jack didn't speak. He didn't need to. From his bag, he pulled out a small metal device, no bigger than a remote. A single red button on top, a camera lens facing forward. He hit record. The light blinked once, and Brandon Hale's world changed forever. What followed wasn't a confession. It wasn't begging. It wasn't even coherent. It was raw terror. Jack didn't threaten. He didn't ask questions. He simply let the camera roll, capturing every twitch, every denial, every nervous laugh that cracked into trembling silence. And when Brandon finally stuttered out her name, Lily, something in Jack twitched. He pressed the pistol harder against the boy's chest and whispered something only the camera would pick up. "I'm not going to kill you. Not yet." Then he stepped back, turned off the camera, and everything went dark again. Brandon passed out. Jack left the same way he came, unseen, unheard, unfelt. But something important had been taken. Not blood, not bone, control. Brandon Hale had always been the king of his little world, star athlete, golden boy. But now the throne had cracked. Someone had peered behind the curtain and seen a coward dressed in privilege. And Jack Carter? He had just sent a warning shot. But that wasn't the mission. The mission was still ahead. Because Lily hadn't whispered just one name. There were more, and the next one was a man named Calvin Trent, Lily's school counselor, the one she trusted when she said something was wrong, the one who told her to keep it quiet, the one who buried it all, because Calvin wasn't just incompetent, he was part of it. By morning the fog had lifted, but not from Jack Carter's mind. The world around him wore its usual mask of civility. Birds chirping over breakfast tables, sprinklers ticking across front lawns, and school buses groaning to life like nothing had changed. But something had. Beneath the quiet surface of suburban Virginia, a storm had begun to churn, silent, invisible, and aimed with lethal intent. Back at the farmhouse, Jack stood alone in his basement, stripped down to a sleeveless shirt, scars from distant wars crisscrossing his back like faded maps. In front of him was a wall covered in corkboard and pinned photos, names written in Sharpie, strings connecting timelines and locations. It looked like the beginnings of a homicide task force investigation. But this wasn't police work. This was personal. At the center of it all was a photograph of Lily, age 8, sitting on his shoulders, her tiny hands gripping his buzzed hair, a lollipop in her mouth and sunlight in her eyes. Below that image, a new one had been tacked up just an hour ago. A grainy still frame from the drone footage Jack had captured inside Brandon Hale's home. A screen-captured moment of shock, frozen forever in fear. But Brandon wasn't the root. He was a branch. And Jack wasn't pruning. He was uprooting the entire rotten tree. He turned toward a steel locker bolted into the basement wall. Inside it, military files, encrypted drives, and something far more telling. A printed report from Lily's school, dated 6 months ago. Disciplinary warning for emotional outbursts and fabricated allegations, filed and signed by Calvin Trent, the school's lead counselor. At the time, Jack had dismissed it. He'd thought it was just teenage rebellion. But now, with the clarity of hindsight and the weight of his daughter's broken whisper still echoing in his ears, everything came into focus. Lily had tried to speak, and they'd buried her under paperwork. Calvin Trent, 42, father of 2, runs marathons, drives a Tesla, volunteer therapist at the local youth center. On the surface, a beacon of progressive, educated professionalism. But Jack had learned long ago, the most dangerous men are the ones who wear good intentions like armor. By noon, Jack was parked 2 blocks away from Calvin's pristine townhouse, watching the man sip an oat milk latte on his porch like a suburban philosopher. He was dressed in joggers and a fitted quarter zip, laughing at something on his phone, earbuds in place, completely unaware that his life was now under audit by a ghost with a gun. Jack didn't move yet. He just observed. Patience was a discipline he had mastered overseas, where you might sit in dirt for 4 hours just for a 3-second shot. That mindset had never left him, and now it guided his hand with the same precision. He wasn't here to kill Calvin, not yet. First, he had to know how deep the infection ran. Jack tailed him from a distance, staying 2 cars behind as Calvin drove into town. First stop, the middle school, where he spent his mornings counseling. Jack parked down the street, pulled out his long-lens camera, and began collecting. Body language, who he interacted with, how he moved through space. But it wasn't the school that triggered Jack's instincts. It was the next stop. At 3:47 p.m., Calvin pulled into the back lot of an old office building downtown, an unregistered therapy center under a different name, Youth Support Solutions, Inc. Jack's own reconnaissance showed no online presence, no state documentation, no licensure. Just a digital paper trail that led to an out-of-state shell company and a handful of backdated leases. Something about this smelled rotten. And Jack Carter didn't wait around when his gut spoke. He returned that night, under cover of dusk, dressed in civilian black. No weapons, no threat. Just eyes and ears and the full weight of his training. He bypassed the rusted rear entrance with a simple lockpick. Inside, the building reeked of must and bleach. The floors creaked. Lights buzzed. It wasn't an office. It was a forgotten place, used for something that didn't want to be found. Room 204 was Calvin's. Jack slipped in, scanning fast. The walls were bare, but the filing cabinet wasn't. Inside were patient notes, confidential, handwritten, and horrifying. Jack didn't need to read more than 2 pages to feel the sickness rising in his throat. Not just Lily, 3 other girls, 1 boy, all dismissed, all labeled as unstable, and all had interactions documented with Brandon Hale. Jack's heart slowed as his hands tightened into fists. This wasn't neglect. It was collusion. Calvin wasn't ignoring the signs. He was erasing them, protecting the abuser. Or worse, enabling him. Jack didn't know why. Maybe money, maybe blackmail, maybe something far darker. But the motive didn't matter anymore. The line had been crossed, and Calvin Trent was now marked. As Jack left, he grabbed the 4 files, not to destroy them, but to preserve the evidence. There was going to be a reckoning, and he'd need proof. Back at the farmhouse, he locked the door behind him, placed the files in a sealed box, and sat beside Lily's bedroom door, listening to her soft breathing. She would sleep peacefully tonight. But tomorrow? Tomorrow would burn, because Jack had just made his decision. Calvin wouldn't get a warning, he would get a mirror. And in that mirror, he would see exactly what he had become, right before the darkness closed in. The moon was high over Arlington when Jack Carter emerged from the farmhouse once more, this time dressed in plain gray sweats and a hoodie. Anonymous, invisible in the kind of suburbia that rarely questions the quiet man walking a late-night path. But beneath the softness of that disguise was a man coiled like a spring, moving with purpose through a world that had forgotten how dangerous he could be. The files he'd stolen from room 204 burned in his mind like wildfire. He had read every word, underlined every date. The entries were clinical, dispassionate. All framed the victims as confused, attention-seeking, troubled. The same pattern repeated with eerie precision. What infuriated Jack wasn't just the cover-up, it was the calculation. Each report Calvin Trent had written was like a surgeon excising the truth from the lives of kids who trusted him. A few lines of ink, and their trauma vanished. Their pain swept away behind words like inconclusive, unstable narrative, and parental influence. Jack had seen this before, overseas, in operations where truth was a commodity and lies were policy. But this was home, and the enemy was living among children. Tonight, the gloves would come off. Jack had spent years building and dismantling profiles. It was how he tracked warlords, smugglers, insurgents. The skill didn't disappear with his uniform, and when he put it to use now, Calvin Trent's life unfolded like a poorly hidden play. By 11:03 p.m., Jack had disabled 2 street-facing cameras around Calvin's townhouse using a laser disruptor. Not enough to raise alarms, just enough to delay any real-time notifications. He approached the back fence like a breeze, scaled it in silence. No lights on inside. Perfect. The townhouse had a security panel just inside the sliding glass door, but Jack had already studied the model online. 10-second entry window, nothing custom. He was in and out in 8. Inside, the place was surgical, sparse furniture, minimal clutter, almost sterile. Jack moved through the living room without touching anything, scanning for irregularities, digital devices, or private storage. In the master bedroom, he found what he was looking for, a small gun safe mounted into the floor of the closet. Basic key code model. Weak. A little pressure, a stethoscope mic against the surface, and 3 minutes later, click. Inside were 2 items that chilled him more than any weapon: a flash drive labeled Sessions Locked, and a set of Polaroids bound with a black rubber band. He didn't need to look at the photos. He knew what kind of man Calvin was now. But still, he flipped through them, one by one, faces blurred in fear, poses staged, most in school settings, predator trophies. Jack's hands shook, not from anger, from restraint. He returned everything to the safe, minus the drive. Letting Calvin live in a house with his own sins would eat at him far longer than just disappearing them. But Jack wasn't done. In the hallway, he taped a single sheet of paper to the wall, at eye level. One word in bold black ink: remember. Then, from Calvin's personal printer, he fed a copy of one of the files Jack had stolen. Lily's report, the one that said she was delusional. He highlighted that exact line, circled it twice. He left it beneath the first word: remember. Patient displays signs of psychological fabrication. It was a warning, and a promise. By the time Calvin Trent would read it, the message would be clear. You're not hidden anymore. Jack drove home just before dawn, headlights off, truck coasting along the ridgelines of empty back roads. His mind churned with possibilities. His training told him to finish the job, to remove the threat entirely. But this wasn't the battlefield. This was psychological warfare. Calvin would spiral. He would look over his shoulder at every turn. Every shadow would feel like justice coming for him. Jack wasn't just hunting monsters. He was unmasking them in their own dens. And it was working. Because by 10 a.m. the next morning, word spread. Calvin Trent had called in sick, didn't show up at the school, didn't open his door, didn't return emails. Rumors were already forming, speculations, whispers, and Jack watched. From a coffee shop 2 blocks away, through a second-story window, Jack observed the movements around Calvin's townhouse. No cops, no fire, just silence. But then, movement. A black SUV pulled into the driveway. 2 men stepped out. Suits, civilian clean, but with posture Jack recognized. Not local law enforcement, too stiff, too calm. They moved like men used to wearing earpieces, like men sent to contain things, not solve them. One knocked, the other waited by the car. Calvin opened the door. He looked wrecked, pale, sweating. The man Jack had seen sipping lattes now resembled a ghost dragged from a grave. He stepped outside, shaking hands, ushering them in. Jack snapped photos through the lens of his camera, then zoomed in on the license plate of the SUV. Government tags, not police, something else, something deeper. It meant Calvin wasn't just hiding something vile. He was protected. Jack leaned back in his seat, his jaw tightening. This was bigger than he'd thought. It wasn't just about his daughter anymore. It was about how many others had been buried to keep the lie alive. And now he wasn't stalking one predator. He was staring down a network. And somewhere at the center of that web was the spider pulling the strings. He didn't know who yet, but he knew where to start looking. In the shadows behind the shield. Because if Calvin was protected, then the man above him was untouchable. Until now. In the dead hours between midnight and dawn, while most of the world lay in a vulnerable, dreaming haze, Jack Carter was already awake, sharpening his edge, mentally and physically. He stood barefoot on the concrete floor of his basement, sweat beading on his brow, shirtless and scarred, moving through slow, deliberate strikes against a hanging sandbag. Each hit echoed with more than muscle. It was rhythm, memory, reprogramming, because Jack had just crossed an invisible line. He wasn't just a father with a vendetta now. He was an operator back in the field, except this time, the battlefield wasn't overseas. It was here. Tidy streets, PTA meetings, district-funded offices hiding rot beneath their pastel-painted walls. And at the top of it all, someone was protecting predators. Someone with reach, resources, influence. Jack wasn't afraid of power. He'd spent years infiltrating power structures that thought they were above consequences, cartels, militias, intelligence double agents. But this was different. This was personal. And personal enemies tend to be sloppy. At 2:14 a.m., Jack inserted the flash drive he'd taken from Calvin Trent's floor safe into a partitioned offline laptop, air-gapped and encrypted, a relic from his intelligence days. As the folders loaded one by one, Jack's fists clenched. Session logs, video archives, encrypted, client reports, redacted, donor ledger. The last one made his blood run cold. He opened it. Inside was a spreadsheet, detailing anonymous contributions made to the so-called youth outreach clinic Calvin had operated on the side. But these weren't just charitable donations. They were payoffs, amounts structured to align with victim silences, parental settlements, and sudden withdrawals from school rosters. At the top of the list, the Alder Foundation, an innocuous name. But Jack knew how to read patterns. This foundation had wired funds 3 days after Lily's original report had been dismissed from her file. Another transfer occurred exactly 1 week after a girl named Jessica R. was pulled from school and re-enrolled out of state. It was hush money, funneled through philanthropy. Jack searched the Alder Foundation, tax documents, website, smiling children in brochures. But the real information was buried in board members and shell accounts. And there, tucked in the center of it all, Thomas Whitlow, former district attorney, now a legal consultant for juvenile policy reform in the state of Virginia. Jack knew that name. He'd seen him on the local news just last month, talking about protecting our youth and streamlining student reporting systems. The irony was suffocating. Whitlow wasn't solving anything. He was sanitizing the crime scene. By sunrise, Jack was already driving toward downtown D.C., away from the shadows of Lily's quiet school district and into the cold, mirrored glass towers of federal influence. He wore a clean suit jacket, a neutral tie, and a set of tinted glasses. His beard trimmed, his posture measured. To anyone else, he was just another contractor heading into a briefing. In reality, Jack was going hunting. He had an appointment, one he made using an old contact's credentials from a defense think tank. The email ID was burned immediately after. His entry was into a public policy roundtable on youth justice reform, where Thomas Whitlow would be speaking as a key voice in ethical oversight. The hypocrisy was thick enough to choke on. Jack entered the conference center at 8:52 a.m., scanned the layout, memorized every exit, and took a seat 4 rows from the front. At exactly 9:17, Thomas Whitlow stepped onto the stage. Gray suit, smooth voice, kind eyes. The kind of man who gave off the aura of righteousness. To the untrained eye, he looked like a hero. But Jack saw past that. He watched Whitlow's fingers twitch slightly as he adjusted his lapel. He watched how his eyes darted to the only 2 men in the room wearing mirrored earpieces. Security! Telltale sign. He knew he had enemies, and that was good, because fear made people move. Jack didn't confront him that morning. He didn't cause a scene. He simply listened, took notes, tracked cadence, speech rhythm, phrasing. Why? Because fear had a frequency, and Jack was tuning into it. Back in Virginia that evening, Jack sat in his truck outside an upscale bar where Whitlow was meeting donors for dinner. He didn't need to bug the conversation. He didn't care what lies were being told over aged scotch and Wagyu sliders. He was focused on a different part of the night, the departure. At 10:38 p.m., Whitlow stepped out into the back alley for a smoke. Jack was already there, waiting in shadow. He stepped out into the dim yellow glow of the street lamp just far enough to be noticed. No words, no weapon, just presence. Whitlow froze. His eyes narrowed, trying to identify the man. But Jack was already turning away, fading back into darkness, leaving just a whisper of something behind. A business card, blank except for one word: Lily. By the time Whitlow bent down to pick it up, Jack was gone. But the seed had been planted. He would start to sweat now. Question everything, retrace steps. And somewhere along that path, he'd slip. Jack would be there when he did, because this wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about exposure, and exposure starts with fear. The next morning, Jack checked his burner phone. Unknown number. No caller ID. One voicemail. He played it. A man's voice. Controlled. Uneasy. I don't know who you are or what you think you know, but I suggest you stop now. There are consequences for pursuing ghosts, Mr. Carter. Jack smiled. The predator had spoken, but he'd made one mistake. He used Jack's name. That meant they were watching him now, but more importantly, it meant they were scared. And scared men make fatal errors. Jack Carter knew exactly what it meant to be hunted. He'd spent years in enemy territory with targets on his back, moving through war zones where every window, every silence, every shadow could hold death. But this was different. This wasn't a battlefield. It was a playground, and the monsters wore smiles. After that voicemail, cold, vague, threatening, Jack's instincts didn't scream panic. They went quiet, calculated. He understood the code buried in that warning. They were reaching out not just to intimidate, but to confirm something. He was close, too close. The predators behind Lily's pain were starting to feel the heat of someone who didn't follow protocol. He'd poked the hive. Now the hive was watching him. Good. Let them. Because Jack had no intention of hiding anymore. The first move was digital lockdown. Jack scrubbed his devices, disabled wireless radios, and rerouted his home IP through layered proxies. He reset burner phones, ditched the old truck, and picked up a stolen license plate he'd stashed years ago for a job he never thought he'd take. When it came to making himself vanish, Jack was better than most federal agencies. It was muscle memory now. Survival by invisibility. By noon, he was operating entirely off-grid. But staying hidden was only one half of the equation. The other was infiltration. And that meant he needed someone inside the Alder Foundation. The receptionist at the Alder Foundation's downtown D.C. office was the perfect mix of oblivious and overworked. She barely looked up as Jack, clean-shaven, dressed in business casual with a generic badge clipped to his belt, walked straight through the lobby with a confidence that said, "I belong here." Because in buildings like this, confidence was the real ID. Jack didn't head to the boardroom. He went straight for the internal server room in the East Wing. His destination clear thanks to a copy of the building blueprint he'd found on a public permit database. Behind a row of humming towers, he located a hard terminal. He plugged in a tiny black device, disguised as a USB stick, but custom-built with a payload that deployed a deep scrape algorithm, pulling every log entry, donor registry, and internal communication flagged under sensitive. 5 minutes. That's all he needed. While the data bled into the drive, Jack stood there in silence, the faint hum of cooling fans swirling around him like white noise. For a moment he thought about Lily's voice again. That whisper, that tremble, that trust. It was the only sound louder than his heartbeat. When the LED blinked green, he removed the drive, cleared the access log, and walked out the way he came. No alarms, no resistance. The wolves never sense the knife until it's already in their ribs. That night, Jack poured through the extracted data in the farmhouse basement like a surgeon dissecting cancer, and what he found made his breath freeze. There was no single predator. There was a system, layered, sanitized, orchestrated like a machine designed to protect not the children, but the abusers. Reports funneled, testimonies buried, misconduct investigations closed with blanket terms like inconclusive due to mental instability or family interference. And worse, the names, teachers, coaches, volunteers, politicians, some redacted, some not. But at the center of it, again and again, one signature kept appearing. Thomas Whitlow, as legal consultant, as case advisor, as anonymous donor. But that wasn't the final straw. Buried in a compressed folder titled IncidentCRX.avi, Jack found video evidence, partial surveillance footage from a school hallway, date stamped 9 months ago. No sound. It showed Lily, crying, cornered, back pressed to a locker by a male figure just outside camera range. Seconds later, Calvin Trent walks into frame, looks at Lily, then the man, then turns and walks away. Doesn't speak, doesn't intervene, just walks away. The timestamp matched the exact day Lily had her first panic attack, the same day Jack had come home to find her curled in the shower, whispering she didn't want to go back. He hadn't understood it then, but now he saw it clearly. This wasn't just a cover-up. It was sanctioned silence, and it had happened in public, with cameras, and still. No one did a thing. Jack stared at the footage, his fists clenched around the edge of the desk until the wood cracked beneath the pressure. He thought about how many others had suffered like her, how many had been marked unstable and erased, how many parents were still in the dark. The time for surveillance was over. This wasn't recon anymore, it was justice. And justice in Jack's hands would come not with a courtroom, but with a mirror and a consequence. He printed stills from the video, cut them into 8x10s, no captions, just the moment Lily was caught on camera, broken, alone. Then he folded them, placed them in plain white envelopes, and addressed them to every board member on the Alder Foundation list. He didn't need them to act. He needed them to squirm. He wanted fear in their veins before the storm arrived, because next would be Whitlow. And it wouldn't be in a hallway or through a camera lens. It would be face to face. And it would end with one question. How long have you been feeding off children's silence? But Jack never got the chance to send those letters, because at 3:12 a.m., his farmhouse security system triggered. Motion detected. Rear entrance. Jack rose instantly, gun in hand, eyes locked on the basement feed. 2 figures, tactical dress, thermal masks, no emblems, not police, not random thieves. A cleanup team. They weren't here to arrest him, they were here to erase him. Jack exhaled once, and then he cut the lights. The war had officially come home. The darkness inside the farmhouse was absolute, thick and pulsing, the kind that swallowed sound and light like a living thing. But Jack Carter didn't need light. He'd fought in pitch-black Afghan tunnels, ambushed convoys under new moon skies, cleared buildings with nothing but muscle memory and breath control. This question mark. This was familiar. This was home. The intruders had entered through the rear utility door. Clean breach, controlled force. Jack noted the technique. Not amateurs. Likely former military, contracted, silent comms, no banter, purpose-driven steps. But they made one fatal mistake. They came into his house. The moment the sensors tripped, Jack had already moved into defensive protocol. He was on the 2nd floor, crouched low near the hallway overlooking the main living space. The power was down, cut from the breaker to avoid backfeed. He'd also disabled the emergency generator hours ago when the voicemail came. He knew they'd come eventually. The only question was when. Now the game had begun. Two intruders, one moving right through the kitchen, one sweeping left toward the basement. Jack watched their paths like a chessboard from above. He counted the seconds, measured their rhythm, calculated. Then he struck. The first intruder moved past the kitchen island, scanning with infrared goggles, unaware Jack was directly above. As the man crept past the pantry, Jack descended the stairwell silently. Barefoot, balanced, a suppressed Glock in hand. He didn't fire. Not yet. He closed the distance in 3 paces, hooked the man's throat from behind with his left forearm, pulled him backward, tight, cutting off airflow instantly. The intruder thrashed, elbows flailing, boots scraping hardwood. Jack's grip was surgical, efficient. He dragged him into the laundry alcove, pressed him against the washer, and used a zip tie to bind the hands before the man could fully react. He whispered into his ear, cold and steady, "You're not getting out of here." Then, with one swift twist, he dropped the man unconscious to the floor. No blood, no noise, one down. But Jack didn't intend for them both to leave breathing. The second intruder had descended into the basement, unaware that every angle of that room had been adjusted. Mirrors, blind spots, and camera feeds feeding to a monitor Jack controlled from his phone. He was moving toward Jack's workstation, toward the files, toward Lily's name. That was the final line. Jack entered from the side stairwell, approached through the workshop storage where he kept the old oil drums. The smell of gasoline was faint, just enough to sting the nose. The intruder turned at the last second. Too late. Jack fired once, center mass. The suppressor hissed. The man staggered, collapsed against the concrete floor with a grunt, blood spreading beneath him in a black pool. Jack approached carefully, weapons still raised. The man coughed once, then whispered something strange. "She told us you'd come." Jack's eyes narrowed. She? He bent down, pulled off the man's thermal mask. Younger than expected, late 20s, buzzed hair, no tattoos, teeth white, military posture. But there was something in his eyes. Panic, but also regret? Jack stared at him, gun still steady. "Who sent you?" The man tried to smile. "Told you not to dig." Then his body went still, dead. Jack exhaled and rose to his feet, dragging the body into a sealed storage cabinet he used for old equipment. He stripped it of its comms unit, earpiece, vest, and ID card. There was no name, just a barcode. Professionals, ghost squads. But he'd killed enough ghosts to know how to haunt them back. The zip-tied intruder upstairs was waking now, and Jack had questions. He carried the man to the garage, sat him in a chair, duct-taped his ankles, his wrists. He poured a bottle of cold water over the man's face to jolt him fully conscious. The man gasped, coughed, eyes darting wide. Jack crouched, steady, voice calm. "I don't need your name. I don't want your loyalty. I want who hired you. You speak, you live, you stall, you vanish." The man hesitated, then nodded. His lips trembled. "It wasn't Whitlow directly," he rasped. "It was someone above him, a woman, never named, code only. Valkyrie runs the cleanup ops." Jack froze. That name, that word. Valkyrie, a ghost even he'd heard of during his time in military black projects, not officially listed, operated between intelligence networks, worked for foundations, defense contractors, and, occasionally, domestic neutralization. Which meant Whitlow wasn't just running a network of silence. He was a node. There was a structure above him. And now that Jack had killed one of their men, he wasn't just chasing them. They would come for him in force. The man continued. She's out of state, operates out of a compound near Lake Windermere, Ontario border. You don't go near her unless she calls." Jack nodded once. "Where's the next target?" The man looked down. Your daughter. Tonight was stage 1. That was all Jack needed. He stood. He didn't hesitate. A quick hit with the butt of the Glock knocked the man out again. This time, Jack didn't zip-tie him. He didn't need to. Because the war had changed, it wasn't about Whitlow anymore. It was about Valkyrie. And she was operating out of Canada. That was his line in the sand. Because if they thought they could cross borders, they hadn't read the wrong file. They had opened the wrong door. Jack packed his gear. He grabbed the encrypted drives, burned all paper copies of the files, and set the farmhouse security system to full lockdown. Then he entered Lily's room. She was still sleeping, curled under a soft blanket, headphones in, music low. Jack kissed her forehead. He didn't say goodbye, only, "I'll be back." Because now he was going north, to hunt a ghost, to bring down a queen, to execute Valkyrie. The highway stretched like a black artery across the night, illuminated only by flickers of pale moonlight and the dull hum of passing rigs. Jack Carter drove without music, without GPS, without any traceable device in the vehicle. His truck, stripped of identifiers, cruised northbound through Pennsylvania toward the New York-Canada border like a blade sliding toward its mark. He was no longer just a father. He was a shadow with purpose. The name Valkyrie spun in his mind like a burning coin. A ghost from the classified corridors of defense intelligence. Always a whisper, never confirmed. A cleaner, a handler, a high-functioning sociopath buried behind layers of non-profit organizations and shell corporations. She didn't just remove problems. She designed systems that created them. People like Whitlow were pawns. She was the architect. By the way, I just launched a brand new YouTube channel where I share more stories just like this, full of emotion, revenge, mystery, and unforgettable moments, especially around old women and hidden truths. If you're into this kind of storytelling, you're seriously going to love what's over there. So go check it out. I promise you'll enjoy it. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell so you never miss a new upload. Link is in the description. Now, let's continue the story. And now Jack knew where she lived. Lake Windermere, technically Canadian soil, dense forests, private airfields, a few old Cold War bunkers built into the hillsides, now sold off to private buyers under development clauses that no one ever enforced. Perfect for someone who needed to disappear, or make others disappear. Jack wasn't going in for surveillance. He was going in for closure. 3 days earlier, he'd made contact with an old recon buddy, someone who owed him a favor and still worked deep in customs enforcement. In exchange for an encrypted SD card holding incriminating video evidence against Whitlow and Calvin Trent, Jack received a set of Canadian border agent credentials, forged documents, and aerial blueprints of a facility labeled only as Stone Pine Retreat, built into the hillside north of Lake Windermere, privately owned by a limited liability trust linked to Alder International. Jack didn't need confirmation. He knew it was her. The question now wasn't if she was inside, it was how many men stood between him and her heart. He crossed into Ontario under the identity of David Warren, a security consultant with fake credentials and a convincing backstory. The Border Patrol barely glanced at his documents. One look at his truck's interior, clean, organized, with a company laptop case and a clipboard of printed invoices, and they waved him through with polite indifference. As the checkpoint faded in his rearview mirror, Jack's jaw tightened. The lies that had destroyed Lily's trust weren't just domestic, they were international. Stone Pine Retreat wasn't on any civilian map. It sat 10 kilometers off the main road, down a winding gravel path, flanked by towering birch trees and patrolled by drones disguised as birds. Jack hiked in on foot, wearing thermal dampeners, moving through the terrain like water, silent, unseen, unstoppable. From the ridgeline he observed the structure, minimal surface architecture, mostly underground. One entrance, a double-door steel gate tucked between two rock formations, guarded by a biometric scanner and a man in a wool coat pretending to be unarmed. Jack smiled. Pretending was dangerous. By nightfall, Jack had mapped 4 patrol rotations, 3 surveillance blind spots, and 1 electrical conduit that fed the compound's external systems. That night, in the quiet chill of the Canadian woods, Jack moved like a ghost and began cutting power. The facility blinked once, then plunged into auxiliary mode. Low light, red emergency LEDs, just enough to create chaos. Jack infiltrated through a side service hatch previously used for HVAC maintenance. The schematics had warned of narrow tunnels. He didn't mind. Crawling through mud, steel, and silence was something he knew better than breathing. Inside, the compound smelled like money and bleach. Marble floors, soundproof doors, glass meeting rooms with no windows. This wasn't a home. It was a clean lab for human damage. And Valkyrie, she was at the center of it. Jack moved room by room, clearing them with ruthless precision. 2 guards, neutralized without a shot. 1 data center, wiped with a thermite charge. By the time the compound's emergency sirens activated, Jack had already planted 2 remote charges on the structural beams of the underground level. He didn't want to bring the place down. He wanted them to know he could. In a locked hallway near the control room, he found it. A private suite. Lavish, silent. At the center, seated calmly at a desk of brushed metal, was a woman in a white turtleneck. Late 40s, sharp eyes, calm demeanor, no fear. Valkyrie. She looked up as he entered, unarmed, watching him with cold detachment. "I knew you'd come," she said softly. Jack raised the pistol but didn't speak. She smiled. "They always come in angry. That's what makes you predictable." He took 1 step closer. "Lily Carter," he said. Her face barely flinched. "She wasn't the first, and you know that." That was enough. Jack pulled a flash drive from his vest and tossed it onto the desk. "Everything," he said. "Every file, every name, copied, ready to go public." Her jaw tensed. "You'll die before you reach a transmitter." Jack smiled faintly. "I already reached it." Her eyes widened for the first time. That was when he pulled the second detonator from his belt. 1 press, 2 charges. Boom! The floor shook, lights burst, concrete cracked. Her compound wasn't gone, but the data vault underneath it was ash. She lunged. He fired. 2 shots, 1 in the leg, 1 in the shoulder. She collapsed, breathless, still alive, bleeding, and exactly where he wanted her. Jack knelt beside her, voice low. "I'm not going to kill you, Valkyrie. Not yet. I want you to watch it all collapse first." She coughed, snarling. "You think this ends with me?" Jack leaned in close. "It ends with your face on every screen, your name beside every victim. You erased lives. I'm about to restore them." She tried to speak again, but he was already gone. By the time security swarmed the hallway, he'd vanished back into the tunnels, silent as the truth she buried for years. He didn't need to kill her, he just destroyed her legacy. But what he didn't know, as he faded into the night, was that someone else had been watching the entire infiltration, recording, following, and now hunting him. Snow drifted silently over the Ontario forest, coating the branches in ghost-white lace. Jack Carter moved like a phantom beneath the trees, blood drying on the cuff of his sleeve, lungs burning with cold air and adrenaline. He hadn't stopped moving since leaving the Stone Pine facility, because he couldn't. Not now. Not after what he saw in the tree line behind him. A silhouette, stationary, watching, too tall for a guard, too still for a civilian. He didn't fire, didn't engage. He ran. Because something had changed the moment Valkyrie fell to the floor, bleeding and furious. It wasn't just the collapse of a shadow network. It was the trigger of something worse, something designed for men like Jack. Someone was waiting for him to make that exact move, to cut the head off the snake, to make it personal. Now, he was the prey. 6 hours later, Jack was holed up in an abandoned ranger cabin 20 miles east of Windermere, nursing a fractured rib and stitching a gash in his side with a rusty field kit. He moved with one eye on the window, ears tuned to every creak in the wind. The fire was out, the room was cold, his gear was wet. But worse than all of it, his comms were silent. The encrypted satellite uplink he'd planted back in the States was dead, burned, disconnected. He didn't panic. He recalculated. There was still one failsafe left, a hardwired kill switch stashed in a mailbox locker back in Buffalo. It held every piece of intel, evidence, and footage, set to auto-release to 6 major news outlets if he didn't deactivate it within 72 hours. But Jack never built systems that failed by accident. If that trigger was untouched, it meant someone had tampered with it. And if someone had reached that deep into his protocol, they weren't chasing him. They were cornering him. By dusk, Jack was back on foot, moving south toward the border, but off-trail, avoiding cameras, roads, and cell towers. The Canadian terrain was brutal, the snowfall heavier by the hour. He knew they'd be hunting him by now, not uniformed agents, not Valkyrie's men, someone else, cleaners, the kind that operated with no name, no country, and no trace. He first spotted them near a frozen creek bed, a flash of glass in the tree line, a scope, not military grade, custom, high-end. They were watching, but not engaging, testing his routes, forcing him into the open. And then he realized he was in a kill box. They weren't just trying to eliminate him, they were studying him, tracking choices, timing, body mechanics. That's when it hit him. They weren't after Jack Carter, the father. They were studying Jack Carter, the weapon, because someone, somewhere, wanted to replicate him, or worse, replace him. At midnight, he reached the border checkpoint near Thousand Islands, frozen, closed, and empty under layers of snowfall. But before he could scout a crossing point, movement in the trees cut through the dark like a pulse. A single red dot appeared on his jacket, then another on his chest, then 3 more on the ground around him. He dropped instantly, rolled, drew his sidearm, and fired 3 blind shots into the dark. Return fire erupted. Suppressors. Silent but deadly. One round grazed his shoulder, another clipped his calf. He crawled to cover behind a rusted border kiosk, clutching his weapon, breath ragged. He was pinned. But that's what they didn't understand. Jack Carter didn't break in a kill box. He turned it inside out. He ejected a flare from his belt, not for rescue, but as bait. He waited, watched. One figure flinched, moved from cover. Too slow. Jack fired. One down, then another. Two left. They began flanking, not realizing he'd crawled into the drainage ditch beneath the crossing. He emerged behind them. One shot, two shots. Both collapsed before they could even react. By the time the snow settled, blood steamed on the ice, and Jack stood alone, wounded but alive. He checked the bodies. No dog tags, no IDs, no fingerprints, ghosts. But one of them had something odd. Tucked in his chest pocket, a child's drawing. Crude, innocent, stick figures, a little girl holding a balloon, and a man standing beside her, tall with a black rifle. Jack turned it over, on the back, in messy crayon handwriting. "He saved me." His breath caught. His fingers tightened. This wasn't a message. It was a test. Whoever was watching him wasn't just tracking his skills. They were tracking his impact, measuring his morality, weaponizing his revenge. Jack's stomach turned. This wasn't justice anymore. It had become a prototype, and someone had been watching from the start. From the first time Lily whispered in his ear, someone who didn't want the predators to thrive, but didn't want them to die either. They wanted to control the outcome, script it, manufacture it, and Jack was their test case. He stared into the forest beyond the checkpoint. There would be no sleep tonight, because he hadn't just stumbled into a conspiracy. He had stepped into a program, and the next name on the list was his. The wind screamed through the farmhouse rafters like a warning, rattling old window panes and setting the porch swing into a lonely, creaking sway. Lily Carter sat cross-legged on the living room floor, the glow of her laptop flickering across tear-streaked cheeks. Her hands trembled as she hovered over the play button. The email had arrived hours ago. No sender, no subject, just a single attachment, titled Confession_003.WAV. She knew she shouldn't open it, knew her father would have told her to wait, to be smart, to stay off the radar. But something in her gut, the same instinct that once told her to run when Brandon whispered threats in her ear, now screamed, "Listen." She clicked play, and a voice, unmistakable, began to speak. "My name is Calvin Trent, and I'm guilty." Lily froze. The recording was raw, unfiltered, shaky, like it had been made with a gun pointed just off frame. She recognized the room from Jack's drone footage. Same pale wallpaper, same cracked lamp. Calvin's voice continued, breathless, trembling. "There were arrangements. I was told to filter out any reports that matched certain profiles, certain kids. If they spoke out, I had to redirect, reframe, erase if necessary." He coughed. "I never laid a hand on anyone, I swear to God, but I protected those who did, because Valkyrie said it was bigger than us, bigger than me, that it was about protecting societal integrity, that too many cases would break the system." A pause, a sniffle, then, "And Lily Carter, she was the first one who saw through all of it. She fought, she made noise, she wouldn't stop asking questions. They told me to mark her unstable, said her father's background made her unreliable, that if I didn't, I'd be discredited, or dead." Lily's breath hitched. She covered her mouth as the voice quivered through the final confession. "I lied. I buried her. I let them all do what they wanted. And now I see it. She wasn't broken. She was brave. And I was the coward who let her burn." Silence, then a gunshot. then static, then nothing. Lily stared at the screen, blinking back tears, her heart pounding like a war drum. Somewhere deep inside, a piece of her shattered, but another, stronger, began to harden. This wasn't her father's war anymore. It was hers too. She called the number Jack had taught her to use only in an emergency. It rang once, twice. Then a voice picked up, garbled through encryption. "Jack Carter is compromised," she said steady. "He's being hunted. Someone sent me the confession. They know I'm here." The line went dead, then pinged. New message received. "Get out. Now." Back in upstate New York, Jack crouched in the brush just outside a weathered industrial building, a forgotten safe house near the harbor, once used for black market intel drops. He bled from 3 places. No sleep, half a clip left. But the fire inside had never burned hotter. He had the hard drives from Stone Pine. He had the burner with Whitlow's transaction history. And now, through Lily, he had the confession, the trifecta. Enough to break the network, enough to collapse Valkyrie's machine. But he was running out of time. Every move he made, someone was tracking it before he did. Every dead drop intercepted. Every encrypted line corrupted. They weren't just watching him anymore. They were predicting him. And then his phone buzzed. An anonymous video message. He tapped it open, heart steady but cold. It showed Lily, in the living room, laptop open, face lit by the screen, watching Trent's confession, and behind her, barely visible in the reflection of the window, a man in black, masked, holding something long and sharp. Jack's blood turned to ice. There was no sound, just video. A timestamp in the corner read, 27 minutes ago. Jack's mind kicked into overdrive. He hadn't trained Lily for nothing. Every escape route, every contingency, every fallback point, but the timing, the video, the perfect orchestration. This wasn't an ambush. It was a message. He called her phone, no answer. Again, no answer. Then, finally, one ring. A click, a breath. "Dad!" Her voice cracked. "They were here. I hid. I don't know who they were, but they didn't speak. Just searched. Like they were collecting something. Not looking for me, just recording the space. They left a box." Jack's voice was ice. "What kind of box?" "A metal one. No writing. Just a single button on top, with your name etched into the side." Jack's chest tightened. This wasn't an attack. It was a command, a prompt, a final test. He gritted his teeth. "Don't touch it. Get to Site Echo. Use Route Red. No deviations." Lily was silent, then whispered, "They said something else, the man, before he left." Jack's eyes narrowed. "What did he say?" She paused. Then he said, "This is the final act. Showtime dot." Jack stood slowly. The wind howled around the safe house, flurries rising like ash around him. He understood now. He wasn't just the weapon. He was the story, and someone, somewhere, was planning to broadcast the finale. Live, public, permanent. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about spectacle, and someone was preparing to execute him in front of the world. Unless he flipped the script first. The sky over northern Virginia was choked in charcoal clouds as Jack Carter descended from the chartered plane. No lights, no logos, just a tail number that didn't exist on any manifest. He moved like smoke, low profile, lean, and lethal. He didn't go home. He didn't contact allies. He didn't sleep. He went straight to Site Echo, a decommissioned fire tower hidden deep in Shenandoah's backcountry, built decades ago, abandoned, but repurposed by Jack years earlier. fortified with a solar array, Faraday shielding, and a hard line to a ghost server routed through a Canadian fiber relay. No cell reception, no Wi-Fi, no signal but one: safety. When he entered, Lily was already there, wrapped in a blanket, dirty, alert, alive. The moment their eyes met, the years between war and family vanished. He kneeled, held her. No words, just breathe. She was still shaking, still scared. But she was his daughter, and she hadn't broken. She had endured. Jack pulled the metal box she'd described from the storage locker in the corner. It was heavier than expected, cold to the touch, and precisely manufactured. Military specification, laser-etched across the top. J. Carter, observe. He opened it slowly. Inside, a single device. A black cube no larger than a deck of cards, a red button on top, and beneath it, a countdown. 001637. Jack's pulse slowed. It was a trigger. Not for a bomb, for a broadcast. This was how Valkyrie's final contingency was going to play out. They weren't going to eliminate him in silence. They were going to make an example of him, and do it in front of everyone. Global, permanent, live. He tore the device apart with surgical precision, ripping wires, extracting chips. In the bottom layer, he found it, a high-range transmitter, encrypted, linked to multiple nodes across Europe, Canada, and the UK. The signal wasn't meant to call for help. It was meant to stream a narrative. Jack Carter, U.S. Marine, domestic terrorist, reckless vigilante, a danger to society. And then, footage, stored locally, playback ready. Brandon's terrified face, Calvin's confession, Valkyrie bleeding on the floor, his own kills in the woods, edited, twisted, timed, spliced into a false narrative. This wasn't justice, it was a framing. A final chess move. Discredit him, demonize him, erase every ounce of credibility. Because if Jack Carter was seen as a monster, everything he'd uncovered would die with him. Disbelieved, dismissed. "Dad," Lily whispered, her eyes locked on the monitor Jack had rigged to the black cube. The screen flickered. A live uplink had already begun. No time left. Jack looked at her. "I need you to leave," he said, voice like gravel. "Right now?" "No." "Lily." "No?" She stood her ground, eyes wide, wet, fierce. "I've watched you bleed for me, for all of them. I'm not running from this anymore." Jack clenched his fists. He had trained her to survive, but he hadn't trained her to watch. The feed began transmitting. Across the world, in dark rooms and encrypted servers, terminals lit up. Jack Carter, live feed 11 countries, 29 mirrors, no kill switch. Jack only had one shot. He had to hijack the feed. He launched his own server, a ghost stream protocol buried in a Russian darknet site that piggybacked on the same backbone Valkyrie's network used. It was risky. If he failed, the fake stream would dominate. But if he succeeded, the world would see the truth. He uploaded the full version of Calvin Trent's confession, unedited. The original Stone Pine video, the school surveillance tape, the board members' payoffs, and finally, a new clip. Jack, staring into the camera, calm, director, unflinching, his voice cut through like a scalpel. They built this system to protect monsters. They used laws to erase pain. They told my daughter she was broken, but she was never broken. She was buried. My name is Jack Carter, and I'm not a terrorist. I'm a father. He ended the transmission with one final phrase. You took everything from us. Now we take it back. He hit send. The streams collided. Encrypted routes scrambled. Fake footage clashed with truth. And in those seconds, those fragile, blinking seconds, the entire narrative fractured. Across networks, phones buzzed, tablets pinged, newsrooms exploded in chaos. Some tried to take the stream down. They couldn't. It was seeded, irreversible, a digital reckoning. But Jack knew the truth came with cost. He had exposed them, humiliated them, beaten them at their own game. And now they wouldn't stop. Not until he was silenced. A ping, a signal. One more alert. Coming from inside the woods, less than 400 meters away. A tactical signature, laser-guided, real-time triangulation. They were already here. Jack grabbed Lily's hand, shoved a flash drive into her pocket. If they get me, you vanish. You get this to the world. No hesitation. Tears streaked her face. He opened the trapdoor beneath the tower, a crawl space, a cold tunnel that led to an old ranger road. Run, Lily, run, and don't look back. He turned, faced the door, loaded his weapon, checked his angles, one final breath. As the doorknob began to turn, the fire tower groaned under pressure as the first breach charge blew the door from its hinges. Smoke billowed in, curling around the narrow stairwell like the breath of death itself. Jack Carter stood tall, injured, exhausted, outgunned, but unbroken. He had no illusions. He wasn't going to survive this, but he didn't need to, because the truth was already out. He fired the first shot before the first boot hit the floorboards, then another. Controlled bursts. Every round bought Lily more time. Time to vanish. Time to finish what he started. Through the chaos, he imagined her running. Flash drive tucked close, boots on wet leaves, heart pounding like a war drum. Somewhere in the dark, she would disappear. She'd make it. He knew she would. She was his daughter. They came fast, rappelling through windows, shadows in formation, professional, ruthless. But they weren't him. He moved like a ghost through the tower, every step laid years ago in preparation for a day like this. Claymores detonated behind him, taking down two. Another slipped on a trap wire and fell through the floor. Still, they kept coming. Jack reached the top level. Only one bullet left. The sun broke through the clouds just as he stepped into the final room. Dust swirled around him like memory. He didn't feel fear. He felt clarity. He raised the pistol and waited for the door to burst open. It did. They came, and Jack Carter smiled. He whispered only one word, Lily. And then the screen went dark. 3 days later, the footage was everywhere. It played on news stations across the US, Canada, and the UK. Not edited, not spun, raw, unfiltered. The truth. The entire web of abuse, cover-ups, and corruption exposed. Whitlow was arrested trying to board a private jet out of Dulles. Calvin Trent's body was found with a note clutched in one hand. Forgive me. And Valkyrie, gone. But her network crumbled. The foundations that funded it were shut down. Survivors came forward. Lily Carter gave her first interview 2 weeks later. Voice steady, eyes sharp. She didn't cry, she didn't have to. Her father had done that for her. When the reporter asked her what she wanted to say to the world, she said, believe them. When someone tells you they were hurt, believe them. And when systems fail us, people like my dad make sure justice still lives. She wore his old military tags around her neck. They shone in the sunlight like armor. Back in the woods, long after the tower burned, a single item was found beneath the crawl space. A flash drive labeled The Last Whisper. It held Jack's final message to the world. Justice isn't a courtroom. It's a father who won't sit still, a daughter who won't stay silent, and a world that finally listens. If you're watching this, keep listening. If this story moved you, smash that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, hit subscribe for more cinematic revenge thrillers, and share this story because the truth deserves to echo. Message to you, the viewer. Not every battle is fought on a battlefield. Some are waged quietly, in schools, in homes, in the hearts of those who carry pain too heavy to speak. This story is fiction, but the pain is real for many. Be the person who listens. Be the voice that stands up. And when the world tries to bury the truth, dig. Justice isn't given, it's taken back. Until next time.